We have another very, very high-powered panel in the stage, and the topic is on how to keep employees engaged with the company's goals and objectives. So for that, we have another fantastic panel lined up for you. And may I again call on stage Shamni Pandey, Senior Editor of Business Today, to moderate the discussion. Shamni.
Very often we routinely hear people saying that people don't leave companies, they leave their bosses. So what is it that keeps them, involved with the company, its goals, its objectives? I would like to open the whole talk with you, Mr. Sriram. What is it that what's the magic glue?
I have some bullet points because I'm very conscious about the time. And I'll go through some of the bullet points which I have. One is, I think, engagement means people using their discretionary time. And when you use your discretionary time, when do you get the time? You get the time either after office hours or during office hours, or you stretch the office hours. So if people are going to discuss, this is just an idea, if people are going to discuss company goals and company mission with their family, with their wives, with their husbands, with even their children, it could be one way of engaging employees better with the goals and so on. Second is empowerment. I think what we enjoy in Larsen & Toubro is a huge amount of empowerment at all levels. And I do feel that that is an extremely good step in engagement of employees with the goals of the company and the mission of the company.
A lot of people don't understand what is talent about. Talent is both, they are both investors and shareholders. Was that what you said, Maria?
One of the fundamental errors I see people talking about, and if you talk about engagement programs of all the companies, if you were to blindfold yourself and remove the masthead of the company brand on the top, you will find 75 to 80% of the engagement programs of all companies practically sounding similar. You will get confused. The question is very simple, that we do not bespoke, we do not customize our engagement programs on the basis of what the talent requirement of your enterprise is in the particular segment of business that you're operating.
What has been, your experience of it, Mr. Agarwal?
To me, engagement is actually a very simple concept. As a human being, whether you are in India or anywhere in the world, regardless to the hierarchy where you are operating from, you're basically wanting to work in a place where what you have in terms of your aspiration is aligned to the organization that you're working for. You want to make sure that you're respected for your capability, respected for your basic human dignity. You have an elbow room to do what you believe you can do competently. The third is that you're recognized, you're rewarded when the job is done well, and there is an opportunity to learn and grow. So these are the basic needs of any person working in any enterprise, anywhere in the world at any levels. What makes it complex is that we forget this simple thing, and we get lost into very highfalutin, sometimes very clever terminology and complex processes. And in the end, you wonder, how are we delivering these basic things to the individual?
So what do you do about keeping, Sumit, if you will, you like to take that on, and how do you keep employees engaged, given that there's no really business connect between how employees are engaged and how a company performs necessarily? Will you like to take that on?
I sort of, have a slightly different take from Adil on this, and it all depends on how you define engagement. The way I look at engagement is, how does an employee create value for himself and the organization? So the moment you start taking that lens, then it's not about attrition. Of course, attrition is important, and the fact that you have people who are delivering value, who stay with you, is a very important metric. But if we start with the value creation lens, then the question in my mind is, what is value creation? Is there a shared understanding of that value creation between the organization and an employee? And when I talk about shared understanding, we often see that the understanding must be both long-term and short-term. So if we just, talk about goals, which is, the topic of today's discussion, and start cascading quarterly goals and annual goals, then the relationship is very transactional. The moment we start talking about a larger objective, and obviously break it down to sort of milestones and goals, and then sort of tell the employee what's in it for him or her. I think if we are able to sort of align these two and there's consistency of this alignment, you will see, and I believe you will see engaged organizations and engaged employees.
Sudarshan, I come to you for the reality check. What is it that you deal with?
I think the panelists are probably making the assumption that better engagement leads to better retention. Is that something which we're talking about? So okay, what is engagement? What is the end game for engagement? You want better output from your people. So then I think the organizations have to sit down and ask a question saying that, okay, is better retention leading to better performance? Because what happens when there is 100% retention? Then it becomes a bit of a cozy club. You don't want organizations which have got managers who work for 20 years and 25 years and 30 years who've been one organization, individuals who've worked only in one organization. What that leads to is perhaps you will get into a frog in a well kind of a syndrome in the organization. Then it actually, in my opinion, it stunts external ideas, it stunts new thought processes. And in business, what's also important is that if there isn't growth, growth is a very, very critical catalyst for engaging people and retaining talent. So if the growth doesn't happen, then again it's difficult to engage and retain people.
I want to now talk about engagement as well as the company's goals and objectives. So who carries the torch of actually seeing that those companies' objectives are met?
I think it's the leaders who are in the company. It's their responsibility to make sure that people are engaged with the goals and the mission of the company. Otherwise you can't have an engaged workforce and you won't have, you'll only have hands and legs, you won't have hearts and minds.
Ask a question to either Mr. Agarwal or Adil or anyone who can take that. I just want to ask you, does better engagement within the organization make you a better employer from in terms of as an attractiveness as an employer, especially when you're looking to attract talent from outside? What's the kind of impact it has on your employer brand?
Adil? See, number one, culture in an enterprise provides the enabling environment which forms the basis for the engagement. Now, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Whatever business goals, whatever business strategies you will have, culture will eat it away if the practices of your enterprise are not leading or not aligned to the goals you are having. And finally, it is the culture that wins. Therefore, if you create engagement, the chances of you meeting the goal is very high because it provides the enabling environment.
Candidates are different kinds. A person who will be interested in short-term opportunities and almost like a venture capital kind of a role would not be your candidate who will sustain with the organization going ahead. So ideally, if you have the mix of the right culture with the opportunity, I think that's what creates sustainable sort of relationships. I think just saying we have a great culture but no opportunity, or saying the vice versa, I don't think is a recipe for something which will sustain.
Who has this onus of building this culture that takes into account the aspirations of the people, respects them, and yet keeps track of what the goalpost is?
Well, I think it's the top management team, not one individual. I'm choosing my words to say that it's the team. If the CXO team, they come together to say this is the future of this enterprise we want to build and this is the cultural fabric that we live by, then it actually will happen. Otherwise, one person may come and go, whether it's an HR person, whether it's a CEO, and it's not a sustainable strategy.
Sometimes this culture is self-defeating kind of a prophecy, so to say, because sometimes, when you're saying you want to be good to employees, you want to be fair, you want to be reasonable, I'm not using the word fair, reasonable, good to your employees, then is that, are we doing enough to demand, extraordinary performance from them? Because we are in there is a tough situation in the marketplace. Companies are running the extra mile. So what is that? How will you build that culture of performance in the organization? Because I've seen often, whenever there is people say that it's very difficult to work with X manager and Y manager because he's round the clock, he's too demanding, and so on and so forth. So people do get uncomfortable in these kind of situations, and they look for a change.
Arvind said, I got a little confused. You asked a question about which Arvind answered, and I completely agree that it's top management which is responsible, and then I'll come to your question, Sudarshan. Just to add to that, Arvind, I think it's important that HR plays a very good role, a very strong role in the architecture of the how. I mean, the top management is, of course, responsible, but they need to know
their own needs and their own
and also there's a mechanism. There has to be a structured, just to use some HR mumbo jumbo, they call it organization development. There has to be a structured way of actually cascading that entire message down, which I think HR can play a great role. And I think, Sudarshan, your question was on
whether culture is it
overrated?
Overrated.
I don't think it's overrated. I think it's extremely important to have the right kind of culture to really contribute. And the answer to your question about is it overrated, if you have a culture of honest adult-like conversations, you asked about performance. Your question was around performance. So my point is, if you have a company with a culture where there's honest adult-like responsible conversations and you're not shy and you don't beat around the bush about feedback, I think it can create a great amount of engagement in spite of being brutal with the truth.
We've had another very, very good discussion. Can we have a huge round of applause for our panel? Thank you very much.